else will break your heart. I'm never gonna hold you back. I'm always gonna have your back. So try to remember that. I hope you're happy.
Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to 321 No Kidding. Bobby the Awesome here. The topic of today's show is celebrating my 5 years of bet-free time, and the list, and it's a list, so if you see me looking over there, it's because there's been many, many things that I've learned in the 5 years that I haven't placed a bet, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So one of those things is that I'm capable of doing things that make me very uncomfortable, like recording myself and talking to a green light on my computer screen. If you're new to the show, I am, like I said, 5 years without a bet. I am also a little over 2 years sober now from alcohol, and I'm about 17 days away from a cigarette. That's been done before. We'll see if we can stick it out this time. I'm really trying. It hasn't been as difficult as the last couple times. And quitting drinking was pretty easy for me. So I'm hoping that quitting smoking does that too. But I still got a patch on my ass, if I'm being honest. So that is what's going on with that. So I wanted to share today, and I don't know what'll show up because that's just kind of how I roll. So I'll share with you the list that I've already started and kind of take a walk down memory lane as far as my recovery journey. I started in treatment, well, at least for this 5-year stint. I did have 2.25 years, 2.5 years prior using GA. And I'll be honest, upon reflection, which is one of the things I've learned, is that as long as I'm reflecting, paying attention to my actions in the past and my behaviors in the past, is helping me pay attention better to my behaviors in the future. And it's also helping me try to be, so I got rid of the word hate. I need to get rid of the word try as well. So it's making me become a better person and a more present person and a more mindful person. So it's one of the things I'm working on. I didn't necessarily have that the first time I quit. So this last time that I gave up gambling was March 21st of 2017 was the day I placed my last bet. And, pretty passionate about the 321. In case you don't know, it's the name of my company, part of my dream, which, you know what, I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about my dream. Might as well do it right now, right? One of the biggest things that's changed from the time I went into treatment until now is having this dream and having this vision of what 321 looks like. So I'm going to make a note so I remember to write that down for you. So I remember to talk about it because it's a pretty big vision and it's a pretty big deal. And it feels really, really good to talk about it. And talking about it helps keep me centered for it. So I went to rehab and I went in Minnesota, and it was a place called Vanguard, which it's my understanding that in the States, we only have 6 places that are formal treatment for gambling addiction, specifically. And in ours, Vanguard had, Project Turnabout is the name of the facility. And Vanguard was the wing for gamblers because they also helped with substance abuse at that facility as well. And I was in there for 28 days. And I was living in Kansas at the time. And then when I got out, I moved back to the East Coast to New York. At any rate, learned a lot of different things when I was in treatment. I learned that I do not like being out of control. And that's what I was, right? I wasn't in control of my own life when I was in treatment. I was in control in the sense that I had put myself into treatment. Nobody else had done that for me. But once I was in there, I didn't get to decide when I ate, when I slept, what TV shows I watched, who my friends were. I didn't get to decide any of that. And I often describe treatment as a cross between jail and summer camp, because that's really what it felt like. But I learned some recovery strategies in there. We would have We would have groups. We would have 12-step. We would have individual with our counselor. We had the step work and we had homework assignments. And then there was meditation time. There was speakers. There was a time where we can go to the gym and stretch. And we also, I think, had physical time too. I learned different triggers about gambling, like inside we weren't allowed to watch sports or shows like pickers or hoarders, or where people go out looking for treasure and then go sell it. I don't mean like treasure in the sea, but tag sales. Do you know what tag sales are? Maybe not if you're not from here, but flea markets, garage sales. That's what they would be called for most people. I don't know why we call them tag sales here in the Northeast, but we do. Maybe because you put tags on the products. At any rate, a lot of different aspects of things that I learned. And when I got out, one of the conditions was that I had aftercare. And because I was moving to New York, I had the opportunity to go to the Center for Problem Gambling, which if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know that that's a huge part of where I got my foundation. And I've learned tons of stuff from there. What was beautiful about the Center for Problem Gambling was, number one, the community. And that would be one of the lessons that I learned as well. Bill, and since going to the center, Bill was the director and Oscar and Sherry were recovery coaches. And unfortunately, we lost both Oscar and Bill in the last couple of years. And that freaking sucks, by the way. But I learned a lot from both of them, and I'm grateful to have had the experience to know both of them. And they're both in my heart, and I hear both their voices in my head, and I'm just very fortunate to know both of them. But Bill really taught us about community. That was one of the biggest takeaways from our environment. And again, upon reflection, right? Like, we knew community was important and we talk about it, but it was even more evident once we went into COVID. And we could see how the family was really dismantled. And very early in COVID is when we lost Oscar due to COVID. And it was a struggle processing that on Zoom and as a group. But what made us special was this community. And there were people that were, I kind of make it like generational in my head, like the first generation, which were the ones who had about a year clean time when I entered the program. And then I consider myself second generation. And then there were some folks that were, came after. So like a third generation. And the first generation had created a WhatsApp group. And back then it was a very robust process. People would post daily. They would post recovery topics, struggles. It was a resource for people to reach out to each other. It was a community. Eventually, and now I'm going to bounce all over, so bear with me. It's been a while since I've done a solo show, really. I've been really working on collaboration and getting back into podcasting regularly. I still haven't caught my regular flow, and I apologize for not showing up on a regular basis like I used to. This was part of what I've learned as well. If I can't show up for you with a smile on my face and with a positive attitude at the very least, which I kind of lost a little bit last fall, I shouldn't be showing up at all. I couldn't, even when I showed up in grief and pain and crying, I still usually could see the good and share that with you, but I wasn't capable. I didn't have that mindset and my act together for a bit. So I'm still getting to, in the ropes. So anyway, we had this community online. We talked often, and the different generations would challenge each other. It was quite beautiful. And the way the center worked, I had a therapist or counselor, I guess is the right terminology. So I would meet with her once a week, and I would go to group. We're supposed to go. It was suggested that I went 3 times a week, and I think I was going twice, pretty faithfully. And I won't take you through every stage of it, but prior to COVID, where we landed was they had enhanced the program, and I was going to Monday night group, which was it was kind of dedicated to the first and second generation, if we're just using that for simple language. So it was people who had a little bit more recovery time, and the theme of the group was called coping skills. And we got to work a little bit on our self-esteem and just how to deal with life now that we had gotten some clean time. So kind of like maintenance. And one of the things that we talked about was like living your life and living your life on life's term and not living in your story. These were some of the themes of that meeting. And then the Saturday meeting was freaking amazing. I think at the time COVID struck, there probably was 20, 30 of us regularly on a Saturday morning. And, we'd get there early and, I would always get there early. I go everywhere early. But there'd be like donuts, or if I had treats from work, I would bring them in, and we would socialize a little, or we always had group, and group was it was usually led by Bill, and Oscar was almost always present, and Bill would have us role play. He was kind of funny. It was like, I don't want to say planting people in the audience, but it kind of felt like that sometimes. So if we had a new member, say, that was struggling, like maybe they weren't telling their wife about some found money, like they got paid under the table or a bonus or something, and maybe they weren't telling their significant other about it. Instead of Bill saying, you should tell your significant other that you have money, because the chances of you going back out because you have access to money, that wasn't a very good Bill voice. Anyway, instead of doing that, he would call on someone to maybe be that person's spouse, pretend, and they would do the role play of telling each other and going through the motions of what it looks like, and then call on maybe generation 1 or 2 and be like, so what are some of the consequences? Did this ever happen to you? Things to make it resonate more with the new members. And with the generation thing, it was also very similar to 12-step, with the giving service back and being a resource. We didn't have necessarily like sponsor-sponsee relationships, but whatever it was working because we could help each other and support each other. And that's really what it came down to. And in the beginning, when I first came back to New York, I was also still going to 12-step more actively with GA. And that was another community. And that's a piece of my recovery. It's a very important piece from both the first time and then even the second time, getting to know the people in New York and GA, seeing how they did things a little different. And that was developmental in my recovery as well, because I had to learn that just because we did it in Kansas one way didn't mean that it was better or worse or less than or more than the way we did it in New York. In Kansas City, it was a little bit more co-ed. The groups, we would have meetings where we mixed GA with Gam-Anon, so that had its value, so we could see and learn more about the family's perspective. We had, practices and structures that were in place. And then here in New York, it was a little different. It was very dominant to the men, and it also had a big community of, the fancy term here would be co-occurring disorders, but basically there was a lot of gamblers that were also alcoholics or drug addicts in recovery. So that was another interesting perspective. And also the means of gambling. In Kansas City, there was a lot more slot machines. And in New York, it was horse betting and instant scratch-offs were two of the more active things. And I'm sure if I went to more Connecticut meetings, with the 2 casinos there, the picture might look a little different. So what I learned, and again, that's kind of what the theme I want to stick to is that it's okay to have multiple kinds of recovery, and that I valued the centers strategy and 12-step both. I valued them both very much. There was some overlap in the communities, which was great to form relationships and stuff. And I liked having the multiple resources. And as time went on and I started living my life, I wasn't quite as active in either place. Maybe it was one meeting one week and two the next, whatever. But as I started, and it's not about time. So let me be clear about that, or at least it wasn't time for me. It wasn't like, oh, I have a year away, I can go to less group, because all the way up, seriously, to the 5 years, pretty much, I had a counselor all along. And the center was ran by the state of New York. So there was criteria and all that good stuff. And technically you could graduate after a year. And I'm very grateful they didn't throw me out and graduate me after a year, because so much has happened the last 5 years. I'm not sure I would have made it through without a vet, without the resource of a counselor. Again, upon reflection, right? It was another person to be accountable to. So that was another lesson. And in the background to the center and GI, I was reading, I was learning a little bit more, and I was listening to podcasts. I started listening to Recovery Elevator. You probably know the story if you've been here a while. When I was driving to those Monday night groups, I would listen to Paul Churchill's Recovery Elevator, and he has an alcohol-free community, and he does recovery a little different. I love how he brings in different facets and doesn't make it just all one size fits all either. And I've learned so much from him. I've learned, and this will just be top level highlights, I learned how to travel sober. I learned how to make connection that way. I learned that sound can be a therapy. We did sound baths. I've learned that breathing, breath work, they call it, is another avenue of recovery. And I guess an overarching theme, I can't break down the whole 5 years for you guys because I would be talking forever, which we all know I'm capable of. I kind of want to give you some of the high levels from different impactful pieces. Enter COVID, and the landscape really changed. And a few months before COVID is when I launched 321, the podcast. And the vision for the 321 Dream had started formulating, I want to say in 2018. I used to go to Zumba events and in Orlando. So it was conference, and we would get, certified. They're funny about the words, I think, between licensed and certified. So we'd get certified to teach different ways of Zumba. And I would go for the fun and the camaraderie, and also to try to be a better dancer, which, guys, I'm not quite a really good Zumba instructor yet, if I'm being honest. But another thing that I'm learning is how to be uncomfortable. And I'm going to be teaching Zumba in front of strangers in May. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be another challenge in learning. I'll have to really put some work into that. I digress, though. So let me finish telling you about the dream. So we're at a Zumba convention, and we're at the pool. It's in Orlando, and it's July, so it's always beautiful pool weather when we're there. And there was a water slide. Now, I've never reproduced, right? Never had children. I don't necessarily have anything against children. It's just that as an adult, and maybe some of this is, mental illness of mine, like the anxiety of too much commotion and noise, and especially the longer that I live by myself and have my own space and my own agenda and everything like that. I'm not one for noise, busyness, things that kids don't even know they're doing impact me on this level where I just feel physically different. Just like my hearing, I hear lawnmowers and machinery and snow blowers and all of that stuff. It makes me really, really bitchy, just like how the kids don't know their personal space. And, these are just Bobbyisms, and I don't know if I'll ever cure myself of them, but I'm aware of them now in a whole different way. Anyway, so we're standing in line at a water slide, and there's children in front of us. And that's where 321 was born. And at the time, I was still drinking alcohol and partying, and not necessarily in this moment, but I was like, I want a place. Let me back up a little. When I was married to Dave, I thought I would be with him for his 50th birthday. And David was like a big kid. So maybe this idea has been formulating for decades, but I wanted for his 50th birthday, I wanted it to be a kid themed party, meaning we would do kid activities like a slip and slide or pin the tail on the donkey. Like that's how I pictured his 50th birthday party, because he was a big kid at heart. So at this water slide, I decided I want to have a building or a place or whatever that was adults only, but with kid activities. Like I don't want to stand in line at a water slide and have children in front of me. I want adult water slides. And I still get a little funny about the way when I say that, or I say adult entertainment as part of the dream. I hope people's minds don't go to the gutter, because that language is used around so many other things. So at any rate, so that nugget, maybe it started with Davey, but I clearly remember that moment when I was standing at that water slide. That began the dream. And what it evolved into, with my passion for raising awareness around gambling addiction, because I feel like it's not talked about enough. And I still, now I can tell you that my perception of this is just my perception, and I don't know what is the truth, because I'm in recovery. So I hear a lot about gambling addiction and recovery, but I don't know how it's perceived by the normal public anymore. I just know that it's ingrained into society in all kinds of simple ways. But anyway, so I decided I wanted to have a place where there was no gambling and no children. That wasn't a casino, because that's generally the place that's like that. And I wanted fun activities and things that symbolized my recovery. And through the course of this 5 years, or the last 3, whatever it was, this is building this, and through coming alcohol free and getting really clear on the things that make me successful in my recovery, like Justin from Blue October, who I mentioned at the top of the show. He, all during COVID, he would be in front of that camera. He did meetings. He hosted meetings, talking to the audience the way I'm chatting with you now. He threw concerts for us, acoustic, just him alone, not the rest of the band, because we were all in quarantine. And he really just helped us survive. And he's in recovery, and he's just a really amazing example. And I forgot what my point was about him. Oh, so he's part of my recovery journey. So when I build the 321 franchises, I want a blue room, I'm calling it, and it'll only play Blue October music. And I want them at my 50th birthday party. And I want to open with them and share them with the world, because I don't think enough people know about Blue October. And if you take the journey of music, from back when Justin was using to now in his recovery, and you listen to the music. I'm not a big music person, guys. And I don't necessarily understand all the meaning. And it wasn't until COVID and him explaining his perception on these meanings that I really got it with a lot of the songs. But I've also learned from Brett that music is personal. It's about how you interpret it, and you interpret it in different moods and in different stages of your life too. It's not, if you listen to Hate Me is a perfect example. When I first heard Hate Me, it had a context. I was kind of confused about it, actually. And as time evolved, I could see Hate Me applying to different relationships that I had. It's not just, like what's the good music to dance to. So there's been a lot of evolution with that, but that's something that'll be in 321. I take photos of flowers. I mean, behind me, you're seeing one of my meditation areas that's between Connecticut and New York. That's another thing I've learned how to do, is meditation. I used to think all those people were freaking woo-woo. But now I pull over to this place behind me and chill. And I also take a lot of pictures of nature and flowers. So that'll be another component, right? Like this is the Bobby dream. I want to teach adults how to play again. I want to share the story of my recovery, and I want to impact the community. I want to give people a safe place to go, and I want people to have fun without it involving gambling or drinking or children, right? Like normal people who may not be in recovery or may not be addicted to something can have a nice night out at my place that's evolving. So that's the 321 kind of vision, and it'll have all different aspects not just like the decor and the music and the food, like there's also going to be Zumba, like a Latino menu to support the Zumba and, Zumba music in a different place. But I love to roller skate. I love to Zumba. I love playing games, not necessarily games with cards or dice, because those are triggers for some people. I love ice cream. Like all those things are going to be built in. I love animals. Animals are going to be part of it too. I actually hope to convince, there's a place in Kansas City called Bark. It's spelled BAR with a hyphen K. And it's a dog bar. It's amazing. So people can go and drink, eat, be merry, and people are watching the dogs, and the dogs get to play with each other. It's beautiful. I'd love to franchise that as part of the 3-2-1 concept. But I digress. So anyway, so developing this dream and going after this dream is another big part of what I am celebrating, here at 5 years. I want to make sure I'm being really clear about this being a celebration, because there's been a lot of speed bumps and obstacles and challenges during the last 5 years. In fact, I'm writing a book called Rock Bottom Recovery that will talk about all the different challenges and what recovery tools I use to survive those challenges, because not like COVID wasn't even my issue. I mean, it was my issue. It was everybody's issue. And it is how we lost Oscar and a myriad of other friends and people near and dear to me the last few years. Like Rob DeBellis, was a big floral industry. He was an amazing trainer. He helped me throw events when I was with Price Chopper, and he was just amazing. And we lost him to COVID. And, there was a lot of those kinds of, maybe they weren't I was friends with them every day, but there was a lot of people that were very special to me. And that's something that's been learned from my recovery too. Like if we're grateful for people and we appreciate them and we care about them, and even if we don't know them, we should be kind. We should be telling people that they're important to us and that they mean something. Yes, I'm starting to tell you what to do. That was not my intention. There are going to be some things that I'm pretty passionate about, that just for humanity and mankind, and with all the things that are going on in this world. I mean, I'm taping this close. Monday will be March 21st, which is my actual 5-year anniversary, but we got to get this ready, to publish so that it's ready. But there's some stuff going on in the world. We're still at the tail end of COVID. There's a war going on. Things aren't just, they're just crazy. Not that that's a good word, but that's kind of what they are. So learning how to deal with all of that. But some of the things that have happened, losing my biological father, there was lessons in that, right? We were estranged. We hadn't talked in 14 years. I only ever knew if he was around and alive because of my first cousin. She would tell me, or the newspaper when he got arrested for stabbing someone, so it was like grapevine kind of stuff. But dealing with his death and the emotional journey that I went on with that so early into me, not like I was trying to not drink at the time, right? So I got back from the sober trip, and it was less than a month of me being sober and trying to see if that was the kind of lifestyle I wanted to live. And I get this information that Bob dies. And I was the oldest kid. And what did that mean? Why was I upset? So self-awareness is one of the biggest gifts that I've been given through 5 years of recovery. And it's probably turning into one of my strengths, almost to a fault. Like I overanalyze all my actions and behavior. Sometimes in the moment and sometimes backwards, but I think that'll make me a better person and help me live in the present. And what I got to between him and some of the other relationships I was in was people who are in addiction. Like if I changed this much in 5 years, I need to give other people grace in addiction. It's not their fault that they do some of the things they do. It's the devil and angel. Let's pretend the angels are us as normal human beings in recovery or not in addiction. And then the devil's being in addiction. I don't want to say I relinquish all the responsibility from him. But if I'm telling you I would be kind to you and support you as a stranger, why would I not give him some grace as an addict as well? So that was a big thing. And I described it as going from, this is one of my favorite things. As I said, I'm trying to get rid of the trying. I'm eliminating the word try from my vocabulary. That's my next one. But processing Bob's death helped me work towards getting rid of the word hate. I honestly don't, and I haven't hated anything for a couple of years now. As long as I've been working on this through my self-awareness on the show, there's nothing that I have to feel that passionate about to hate. I don't like lying. I don't like people who steal. I don't like, I don't like bad people or bad things, but it's not hate. It's not the passion of hate anymore, where I used to think I hated Bob. And when he died, what I came to discover was that I wasn't necessarily mourning him because I had already lost him years ago, but I was mourning the opportunity to move the needle from hate to neutral, which is about where I was when he died. As I was going on my recovery journey, I could look at him with a little bit more grace, but to go from neutral to maybe forgiveness. And that's brings me to another perfect point of a lesson I've learned through recovery. And that is forgiveness and letting go of the resentment. Not an easy one, guys. Not an easy one for most. And I can tell you today, I don't hate anyone. I don't resent anyone. And there's nobody I have left to forgive. I've done the work on that. And it wasn't just, like doing the 12-step work and writing the lists and stuff, but I've done a lot of spiritual work on that. There was a class called, I don't even remember what it was called, maybe Dream Life, something. I don't know. So the fellow, James McNeil, and he had us do this exercise where we had to write out stuff to forgive. And I did those exercises in addition to my recovery. And now like I said, there's nobody I really have left to forgive. And as I go on to this, where my recovery has led me, and another huge, huge thing I've learned and incorporated into my daily life now is spirituality. I truly 100% believe and would advocate for me. Now, I hope people would at least explore this if full recovery isn't happening for them, or they've tried a lot of other things. But the difference between when I quit for the 2+ years in Kansas and now is my spirituality. And huge, 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 huge. It was a gift that complemented what I learned in GA, what I learned at the center, what I've talked about with my counselor, what I read about. It complemented all that and made the whole forgiveness and resentment and all of those things easier. It makes seeing my dream about building 321 easier. It makes my self-awareness and my purpose in life clearer. And here's how this went down, because there are a couple of very important parts about me going on my spirituality journey. When I was in rehab, we started working on the 12 steps, and I left there after completing the 5th one. So the 4th one is the inventory. And I wasn't necessarily a God person, but I was okay with saying the universe, for steps 1, 2, 3, where you're kind of accepting you're powerless and that there's a higher power. 4 is, writing down all the bad shit you did, essentially. And if you do it the way I think you should do it, you should include some of the good stuff. You're taking an inventory and you're not all bad. But step 5 is when you kind of clean up and let go of that stuff, right? You forgive yourself. You confide in someone and you tell them, or at least this is the way I handled it, right? So I told the chaplain, all the bad things I had done, and I couldn't hang on to them, right? Because if I was hanging on to them, then I would want to go gamble and not think about them and cover the feelings associated with me knowing that I did these bad things. So I got to step 5 when I left treatment. So then the next couple of years were working on, the next round of steps. And throughout that, you've heard me talk about my friend Brett that I met in treatment. We were having a conversation one day, and he said he stopped going to church when he was in active addiction because he didn't feel like he deserved to, which I thought was really interesting. Like, he didn't think that he was worthy of like his God's love. And that deserve thing really made me curious. And this was a really pivotal, this line, and I've shared this before, but this is a really pivotal thing for me. It was like, well, wait a minute, what's so good about church? Like, why does he think that way? Well, like, what's this gift that he doesn't deserve? And it led me to exploring it. I was working the steps anyway, but it took it to a whole different level. So in 2019, I was on, it was 2019. So I was working on step 11, and I had two things I was working on for 2019. One was that I could not use, this would be like my New Year's resolution. I couldn't use alcohol as a coping device. So if I was drinking, it wasn't, my intention was to not drink to solve problems or escape or any of those things. And part of that, again, was the mirror that Brett shined on me, like, dude, you're drinking too much. And he wouldn't say it that way. I'm just kind of summarizing. So that was one of them. And then the step 11 was sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God as I understand him. So I needed to meditate and I needed to figure out spirituality. Those were the things. And if you've heard me ever talk about what 3-2-1 means as far as a recovery thing, mechanism or a cheat, this is what 3-2-1 means. Number 3 is try 3 things at least 3 times. Or if you try, it could be more than 3. It should be more than 3. But try something at least 3 times before you decide if you love it or hate it. Whether it's golf or going to church or whatever the thing is, a GA meeting. Try 3 different meetings. Try the same meeting 3 different times. But don't shortchange yourself by only trying something once. And then 2 is there's 2 rules to quit gambling and keep coming back to whatever your, a man I interviewed recently called it recovery capital. So I guess I'm going to integrate that into 3-2-1. So 2 would be don't gamble and keep coming back to your recovery capital and build on it. And number 1 is, you're number 1. When it comes to your recovery, you have to put yourself first. So my rule of 3, which wasn't in the recovery context at the time, was kind of evolved through my self-education and entrepreneurship. But I had to go to church 3 times before I decided whether or not I was going to keep going to this church. And that was just, I'm a very black and white person when it comes to following the rules for me. I'm not saying everybody else has to be that way. It's just what works for me, keeps me accountable and motivated and in a direction I'm supposed to go. So the first day that I went to church was New Year's Day or New Year's weekend, we'll say. And it was a substitute pastor. So it wasn't a fair assessment. So that was the first time. Then the second time was the home pastor, and I loved it. And then the third time I was like, but I was like, okay, I got to do the work. And this is one of the big lessons from 5 years of clean is you got to do the work. And you have to keep showing up for yourself in that way and doing the work, whether you want to or not. There's a book by Mel Robbins called The 5-Second Rule. And essentially she teaches people to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as kind of like the blast off. Do the thing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Do the thing. Get out of bed. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just get in the car and go to church. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So on and on. So I was applying that to church, and I ended up going to church for most or all of 2019. I ended up having a hysterectomy at the end, so it slowed down, and then we snowballed into COVID, so it kind of ended. But by going to this church, how it felt to me, what I thought was interesting was I would be going to group say on a Monday night, and we'd have a topic. And then on Sunday, it seemed like that the pastor was talking about the same thing we talked about in group, but from a different lens. So I started viewing church as a different form of recovery for me, where I was getting the same message or messages that I needed to hear the same way I would in group. And that was kind of the birth of my spirituality. Now, fast forward to today, after going through all the rough stuff in 2020, I got to the other side of it, on the other side of Bob's death and COVID and Oscar's death and Uncle Hank's death and just like all the things and all the emotions. And I was like, oh, all this bad shit happened to me for a reason. I believe, and I came to this in 2020, as the reason was so that I can reach more of you. So that if there's someone who experienced a family member who's committed suicide, or an alcoholic parent, or someone who abandons them, or, a mentally ill sibling, whatever those things are, all the things that I've experienced in life gave me tools to serve you. That was my spiritual awakening in 2020. And it felt really good to have gratitude for everything that has ever happened in my life. And that's kind of where my spirituality led me. Then we go into 2021 and more bad things happen. And I know now that all bad things happen for a reason, but I still struggled to get to the other side of that. And it was dark. It was dark, guys, which is part of why I have to write this book, Rock Bottom Recovery, because I need to share that even when you do all the work, even if you listen to every single thing I said and more, and you were working on your recovery and doing excellent at your recovery, it doesn't mean that life stops giving you shit. And it doesn't mean that the risk of going back out there will ever go away. It doesn't, like, you don't get recovery, you don't get cured. It doesn't all stop. And that's kind of the point of that. So I kind of lost my way. Like, it was always there. I always knew that once I got to the other side, it would be okay. But I was not liking the process, not wanting to trust the process, starting to question this newfound faith that I had, that I was like 100% all in on. Like, sorry, I used a gambling term there, but I really, really, really believed that I was, picked for the 321 mission, that I'm here to serve the people I'm here to serve. There's a lot of, and you've met them hopefully on my show by now, different podcasters and amazing people in this community that are doing their piece for this movement. But I had my piece, and I had my value and my story and my unique experiences to share and to help with. And I could see all that. But I did not want to deal with that last year. I was in victim mode, which was part of what I did not want to teach you, which is why I wasn't here. So it took a while to get back to full 100% belief and faith and enthusiasm about all of that. Like, I always knew all along, but I just couldn't change the feeling in it, which goes back to some of the other things I've learned, whether I've learned them from Paul or I've learned them from Grant Cardone, who's my business boyfriend, who is his own method, like its own method of recovery, and what gives me strength living in his environment and understanding his principles and his messaging, because there's spirituality in it, there's recovery in it. He used to be a drug addict. It's the whole what's that word? Not perseverance, but redemption, like a redemption story. So he has all of that. But even with all those tools, it wasn't feeling good. And it really wasn't until January when I read this book called The Magician's Way from William Whitecloud, which was another piece of spirituality, that I got more pieces of the puzzle and I really started to get out of my funk. And because I learned, and mind you, New Year's weekend, here's some other things that I learned and did. Intentions. I didn't know that setting intentions or what that meant before my recovery. I didn't go to yoga before my recovery. I didn't participate in, like I'd gone to a meditation intention group online, and then I'd driven to New York and did the same thing, but those weren't part of my practices. So even though if I didn't try them 3 times at least, right, I might not have adopted them into my recovery practice. So that really shifted and got me out of the darkness of where I was in 2021. And Now, sitting here today at 5 years debt free, I can tell you that I have learned that it'll always get better. I'm learning that it'll work out exactly the way it's supposed to. And that's because of my spirituality. It's because of my experiences. It's because of the journey. And again, I'm not telling you the journey's perfect. I'm not telling you it's sunshine and rainbows once you quit doing the thing, because it's not. I'm not telling you you can lax on it, because you can't. At least that's how it worked for me. Again, I try to not be too bossy all the time. So I'm gonna savor this half a decade, right? And there's the one day at a time principle, and I get that as well. For me, I feel like if I ever was to gamble again, it would be a choice, a conscious choice. It wouldn't be a coping mechanism per se. At least that's the way I feel about it right now. Because if it was a coping mechanism, when I was in the UK last fall with no plane ticket home, no idea how I was getting home, when I was getting home, and no money in the bank and all of that. And I'm sitting above a bar slash slot machine place. If I was going to gamble to cope, that would have been the night, right? So I know I can persevere. I know that's probably one of the biggest things. I know that I'm a better human being in recovery. I'm kinder to people. I give the thing I've been practicing lately, and it's a work in progress, let me tell you. But the thing I've been practicing lately is assume the best in people. I never even gave a shit about people before. Maybe my people or whatever, but still I was very, very selfish. Whether I was drinking or gambling was all about Bobby. And now it's, instead of going right to judgment or thinking the worst or assuming the worst, I'm working on finding the best as the first result. So I'm only at the beginning, guys. That might sound weird, but I'm 2 years away from 50 through this journey. This was another thing. This was a Deepak Chopra. I hope I said that right. But he was talking on something I was listening to lately about the life expectancy moving up. And I'm summarizing, so bear with me. But basically, most people are going to live to 100, or that's the average age or life expectancy. I don't know why I'm struggling with my words today. So if that's the case, when I turn 50, that's my first birthday, like of chapter 2. That's the way I'm looking at it. So it's my 50th birthday or my first birthday on chapter 2. And going into that with 7 years of clean time, when the point comes, pretty epic. Like and the reason I look at it like a first birthday is because, that whole saying, if I knew then what I know now, that's how I feel about it for part 2 of my life, because I'm going to be looking at this as like, I'm getting old. I'm not going to make my dreams happen. And I can start getting all that stuff. But I think ultimately what I've learned through this journey, through a lot of work, through a lot of self-reflection, through a lot of feedback from people, is that I can do anything that I put my mind to. I'm a beautiful, amazing person. I am setting the stage to pave the way for people like Kylie, my niece, to have a better world to live in, to grow up in. I'm showing her that there's hope, that you can escape a family full of addiction, mental illness, and that our circumstances don't define us. That's who I am today. That's what I've learned after 5 years of being in active recovery. All right, beautiful people. I love you. Thank you for listening. I hope you got some value out of that, and I will talk to you soon.